So the next thing that we're going to configure is what's called a user details service. A user details service is essentially code that's going to get the users out of our database and return them in the form of a user details. A user details is just a kind of a strange word. I don't know why they call it a user details. It would probably be better as just a user, but they call it a user details. And when you get actual users out of the database with the user details service that we're about to create, it's going to be returned as a user details. We're not actually going to configure our own authentication provider. We're going to use the default because we don't have any Active Directory or any type of enterprise LDAP. We are going to configure our authentication manager, and we already configured our authentication filter. And what's going to happen is a request is going to be made. It's going to go through all of this. It's going to hit the database. It's going to return a user. It's going to go all the way back, and the authentication details are going to be stored within the security context. And the security context is what's going to allow you to log back in after you've logged in. You'll be able to actually stay logged in after. So all of the actual authentication details are going to be stored within the security context, so you don't have to log in every single time you refresh the web page. So enough said. Let's go ahead inside of IntelliJ and let's start working on our user details service. And we're first going to start by just creating a custom user details service within our security file. So custom user details service, just like this, we're going to create a class. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into here and we are going to bring in our user repository right after we annotate this with the service so it doesn't give us any errors. So first we're going to go into here, we're going to go private. This is going to be the user repository. Once again, user repository. Next thing, we're going to generate a pretty normal constructor. I'm sure now that you know what a constructor is at this point, and you know what auto-wired is. We're going to auto-wire it, make sure we bring it in, make sure that it is usable. Then we're going to configure what's called a load by username. And the way that we're going to do that, we're going to go up here. We're going to implement this, and we're going to implement from the user detail service. So the user detail service is actually an interface, and this interface is going to require us to have the load by username. And once we have that, what we're going to do is we're going to go down here and we're going to fetch our first user by the actual username. So we're going to go here, we're going to go user entity, and so we'll go user entity just like this. We're going to have a user, and then we will have a user repository, and we're going to actually create a creation method here, and we're going to call it find first by username. Because if we don't have the first, what it will do is it will bring back more than one username. So you need to make sure that it is find first by username. So I'm going to go in here. I'm just going to copy this. We'll go inside of our user repository right here. And we're just going to go ahead, bring this in just like this. User entity, find first by username. We'll have a string. So the string will be username. This will automatically create it for us, and we are good to go. The next thing that we're going to do, we're going to check if the user is null or not null. So if the user is not null, there is indeed a user in there. So we're going to go user. So we'll say user, make just a normal if statement, and this will be regular user. This will not be user entity. So you want to bring it in from this user, from Spring Security. Don't bring this in from your actual code. Bring this in from Spring Security. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So we'll go, this will be the auth user. So this will be the user that's actually authorized. And we'll new it up. And then we're going to go down in here. We're going to have a user. We're going to have get email. We're going to have user dot get password. Then we're going to have user dot get roles. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to make a really fancy for loop in here, and we're going to iterate through it, and we're going to shove all these roles, essentially what we're doing, into what's called a simple granted authority. If you don't know what a granted authority is, Granted authorities are a more granular form of role. So a role would allow you to access certain parts of the app, and a simple granted authority will allow you to make an even more granular form of the role. So maybe you had a role and you only wanted people to be able to create, or maybe you wanted users to be only to read certain places. That is essentially what granted authorities are. It's not as complicated as it sounds. And IntelliSense already took care of that for us. We're going to go down here and we're going to put a semicolon. And if this is what we want, we're going to return the auth user. So we'll go auth user, and we will have an else. We're going to have an else. And if there is an else, we're going to throw a user not found exception, and we are going to return invalid username and or password. So we'll say invalid username or password. And that actually should be enough for our custom user details service. The next thing that we're going to do is we got to bring this into our actual security config. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to just go ahead and bring it in. We'll go private. We'll go custom user details service. We will call this user details service. Then we'll go down here. We're going to generate a constructor with auto wired. So say constructor, go okay, then just go down here and we're going to say auto wired. So we'll go auto wired, and that should do it. And we're not getting any errors, so it looks like it brought it in nicely. The next thing is we need to bring in what's called a password encoder. And a password encoder is going to make it so that we're not storing passwords plain text within our database. Storing passwords inside plain text like we're doing right now. Like if you look inside of our database right now, except for this one, this is where I was testing it earlier. This is a no-no. You never want to store passwords in plain text. You always want them hashed, because if somebody were, God forbid, or were able to actually break into your database, if your passwords are in plain text, they can easily hack other people, and it will be a huge PR nightmare, if you know what I mean. So definitely don't store passwords in plain text. And if you do that and people find out you're doing that, that might not go over too well with the developer community. Okay, so next thing is we're going to do is, this is what our authentication manager is going to be. So we're in our user detail service right now. We're creating our own user detail service. We're not providing an authentication provider right now, but for right now, we're making our authentication manager. So, and then we're going to, it's part of our authentication filter, but what we're making now is our authentication manager. So we're going to go configure, and we'll say authentication manager. So we'll say authentication manager builder, and we're going to call this builder. And this will throws exception. So if there is an exception, it's going to throw, and we'll go down here. And next thing we're going to do, we're going to use our builder here. We're going to go user details service. We're going to pass in our user details service, and we will have our password encoder. And this is what's going to allow us to have passwords not stored in plain text within our database, and actually be able to get users out of our database. And the great thing is that Spring Security is going to handle all of this for us. So this is pretty much all that we have to do. So Spring Security in 2020 is really robust, and it works. It's actually a lot more simpler than it used to be. So we're looking good. We're making good progress. So the next thing that we're going to have to do, we're going to have to go inside of our user impl, and we are going to have to add our password encoder right here, so that when the user registers, it actually stores the it does not store it. So when the user registers, it has to be, this is what's going to allow it to be not stored. So we're going to go in here, and what we did before was what essentially allows us to be able to get users out of the database. And what we're doing now is we're making it so that when we put users in the database, it's not in plain text. When before we were actually worrying more about getting users out of the database. Thing that we're going to do, we're going to have our password encoder. So we got password encoder, and then we'll go down here. So let's say password encoder, semicolon. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go down to our actual password encoder. So we're going to go password encoder, and then we'll go encode. We're going to wrap this actual registration DTO get password in brackets so that, once again, when we actually save the user, it will actually encrypt or decode or encode the actual password. Okay, and that is pretty much it. So let's go inside and let's actually test it out and make sure everything's working good. I'm gonna go ahead and refresh it, go in here and see if it's working the way that it is intended to be working. Okay, so I'm gonna go in here, and first place I'm gonna test out my register, and I'm gonna call this test 3, go test 3, and I'm gonna do the same thing for the password. It's gonna be test 3. Go ahead, hit that register button. We created it. So let's go ahead into IntelliJ and let's go into the database and see. And would you look at that? That is a beautiful password. It is not legible at all, which is exactly what we want. So I'm gonna go ahead, log out, and make sure that everything is logged out. Then I'm gonna go test 3. I'm gonna give it the same password, test 3. And our login is working exactly the way that we want it to. That was very quick and painless. We can now start working on actually securing the rest of these right here. We're going to secure the edit. We're going to secure all the updates so that random people cannot just edit things all around our app. Anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed this. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. And as always, thank you for watching.